Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn at pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
And good morning to you. It's June 17th, and here we are yet again. I'm going to do something a little different today, at least the beginning, and mention some things that are not related to the big stories that have been taking all of our attention, although we'll get to them soon enough, I'm sure. I don't know how much attention this has gotten, but I just want to put it out there in case you hadn't heard or seen it. The fact that a chief executive, a CEO of a huge utility company, stood in a courtroom yesterday, and over the course of a half hour, because it took that long, responded with 3 words to each charge that was leveled from the bench. The charges were 84 counts of manslaughter. And before the judge read each count, there was a screen which showed the human being no longer here. And no longer here because of the criminal negligence of the company overseen by this CEO. So 84 times, with a different face staring at this CEO, he was asked, how do you plead? How do you plead to the charge of manslaughter of this human being? And 84 separate times, that CEO yesterday said, guilty, Your Honor. A CEO in America pleading guilty to the deaths of 84 people. The CEO who was doing so was not doing so as a person. He was representing the company. He was not saying he was guilty. He was saying his corporation was guilty. And as we know from law in the United States, corporations, we've been told, to our astonishment, are people. The corporation is PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. The 84 people they killed were killed as a result of fire caused by the utter negligence of PG&E to keep up their transmission lines. Now, you would think that if you were guilty of 84 deaths, you'd be looking at some serious time, right? But of course, while corporations get a lot of the good perks of being human, you can't put a corporation in jail. And so it was decided that because of the neglect that led ultimately to the fire, which led ultimately to the deaths of 84 human beings, the loss of extraordinary amount of acreage and property. This is the fire that destroyed the inaptly named little town of Paradise, California. But because of the neglect that led to it went back so far, our justice system could not figure out any particular executive, any flesh and blood human being to be charged. Or so the DA said. It is extremely unusual for an American corporation to be charged with homicide. And yet, what is the impact to PG&E? Oh, it's going to pay the maximum penalty of, a little less than $3.5 million. I had originally read that as 348, but I swear to God, there's a dot in between the 3 and the 4. $3.48 million. Now, of course, when all these troubles happened, PG&E did what companies always do to shield themselves, declared bankruptcy. That happened last year. And they cited bankruptcy because they said, heck, we got more than $30 billion in potential liability claims coming at us. So we're going bankrupt. It was shown throughout the trial that decisions made by management allowed the power lines that they owned to deteriorate. They stopped the frequency of inspections. They stopped the thoroughness of inspections. And this happened over a course of years, even decades. The company announced new rules allotting saying there was a cap on the amount of time any inspector could stay with any one line. Inspectors were told, just move on, move on, move on. This is what happens to workers all the time. Charges were levied and proven that even these inspectors were not even trained properly. And they were forced to use methods that limited their ability to even see and catch problems. Some of the oldest transmission lines PG&E still has, including the one that started this Paradise fire, were built in the 1910s and 20s, over 100 years old. So I'm reading the Wall Street Journal story on this and saying, well, then, but what happens? I mean, what? We got 84 people dead? Yeah. Here's what the Wall Street Journal says. PG&E is expected to exit bankruptcy later this year. More leverage than ever after settling liability claims totaling $25.5 billion. Hedge funds who bet on the company's recovery are now set to make billions from the resulting plan. A complex compromise between shareholders and debt holders. There are people, the usual suspects. PG&E will go on and will recover. And these hedge funds are going to make tons, billions, off of these, I guess, perfectly legal ways of avoiding real payment for crime. And then the article ends with the victims, the families of the dead. They will come out of the bankruptcy with uncertainty over whether they can cash out the stock. They're going to get stock in the company that killed their loved ones. They will be left with uncertainty over when they can cash out the stock they will receive as compensation for their lost loved ones, for their homes, for their businesses. Because half of the $13.5 billion settlement awarded to them will be paid in company shares through a trust. I don't pretend to understand the legal aspects of that, but I cannot read that story without feeling extreme rage. Guilty, Your Honor. 84 people dead. And they'll be popping champagne corks on Wall Street. All right. Sorry. And we have not had an obit of the day in so long because we've been knee-deep in obits. But this one, and it is someone who did succumb to COVID-19, I just found the life an interesting life, so I have to share it with you. It's a life of a good Jewish boy gone bad. Alan Hurwitz. He was a middle school English and social studies teacher in Detroit. He was an advisor on desegregation in Detroit's public schools. He was appointed as a member of a state task force on school violence and education. He was director of a civic group called New Detroit. And then over a 9-week period in 1992, Alan Hurwitz robbed 18 banks. He robbed 18 banks. He was all over the upper Midwest, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois. The FBI had him on their most wanted list. He was he was called the Zombie Bandit because all of the tellers who had faced him said that he had this like blank expression on his face, like a zombie. The TV show America's Most Wanted featured him, and that, as it often did, led to his arrest. So he spent 12 years in prison, which, if you think about it, that ain't bad. You rob 18 banks and you get less than a year for each. So he spent 12 years in prison and gets out. But then it happened again. 2008, he pulled another string of armed robberies. This time he's on the West Coast living with his daughter, so it was in Oregon and California. And he got captured again in Wyoming, and this time he got sentenced to 17 years. And that's where he was until 1 month ago, when he was among many who was granted a compassionate release because COVID-19 was spreading among the inmates. 8 prisoners there had died by the time he was freed. He had not even been tested in prison. They just let him out. And of course, he had it. He died. He was 79. Just a few addenda to this social activist, middle school teacher who turned into the Zombie Bandit. He had been growing increasingly angry that his 3 decades of trying to make things better, in trying to make things better in the desegregation of Detroit schools and trying to make things better with education and violence and all of the stuff that he was involved in, not really ending up getting anywhere. He really was getting mad. And then, here's where the real break happened. He got into crack. And it was feeding the crack habit that led to the bank robberies. Strangely, his daughter said that it was in prison that he found his real calling. He organized inmates. He taught them how to, love reading and writing. He taught them history. And he never, ever said that he felt any guilt about his crime spree. None whatsoever about the money he stole. His daughter said he hated bankers. And he said they're federally insured, so no harm done. His only regret was any trauma he caused the tellers, who believed he had a gun in his waistband, which he did not. So there you have it, the strange story of Alan Hurwitz, teacher, social activist, robbed 18 banks in 9 weeks. Okay, so that was just a little something different. I ordered a bunch of masks. Has to be almost 6 weeks ago. And I thought I'd been had because they never came. I never heard that they were coming. And I checked to make sure that, and in fact, I had charged them to my credit card. Whoever was making these masks had the money. I did not have the masks. And I thought, oh, yeah, well, so they came yesterday. And I pulled one out, and wow, it's really nice. It fits cloth, and it fits really well, and it has a pocket for a filter, and it also came with filters. And then I thought, well, I don't know how do you care for this? So I looked at the package that the mask had come in, and I read, here are the instructions I read. Carry this product. Please divide the opposite side. Do not wear back. Anti-external will stick dust powder. Direct contact between mouth and nose will be detrimental to health. Wash the poison once a day. Wash it with warm water first, then hot and hot. Those are the instructions. I thought, who the hell? What the huh? And I said, where the heck? And then I saw in little print at the bottom, made in PRC. That would be the People's Republic of China, right? I mean, the little directions, the care directions that came with it, suggested China to me, but made in PRC nailed it. So I must say their directions are a little off-putting because there's all kinds of, I don't understand any of it. Please divide the opposite side. What the hell does that mean? Do not wear back. What does that mean? Anti-external will stick dust powder. And wash the poison once a day. Hello? I don't know. But I got them finally. I got like 4 of them. Wash the poison. All right, I can do that. Hang on a minute here. I lost my... Okay. I came upon a quote from Bob Dylan. It's a current quote. I mean, he didn't actually sat for an interview. And hang on here. Strangely, he sat for the interview with Douglas Brinkley, who is a historian, right? But it's quite clear from the interview that they're sort of pals. I find that strange, but what the heck? So, but here's what Brinkley asked Dylan, why didn't more people pay attention to Little Richard's gospel music? Actually, when Little Richard died recently, and I read his obituary, I was blown away by the fact that much of his talent went into production of gospel music. And I didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue. And he was asked about Little Richard because he credits him with really his entire career. He said, I grew up with him. He was there before me. He lit a match under me. He tuned me into things I never would have known on my own. And then he's asked, but why didn't more people pay attention to his gospel music? And I just want to read Dylan's response because I think it's just so helpful and just right on about our culture and specifically our news culture and news and entertainment culture, okay? As Dylan says this, why didn't more people pay attention to his gospel music? Probably because gospel music is the music of good news. And in these days, there just isn't any. Good news in today's world is like a fugitive, treated like a hoodlum and put on the run, castigated. All we see is good-for-nothing news. And we have to thank the media industry for that. It stirs people up, gossip and dirty laundry, dark news that depresses and horrifies you. On the other hand, gospel news is exemplary. It can give you courage. You can pace your life accordingly, or try to anyway. And you can do it with honor and principles. There are theories of truth in gospel, but to most people it's unimportant. Their lives are lived out too fast. Too many bad influences. Sex and politics and murder is the way to go if you want to get people's attention. It excites us, and that's our problem. Bob Dylan. Wow. I was just blown away by that. We have a call. Hello, caller.
This is Beth. Hi, Lynn. This is Beth calling.
Hi, Beth.
I bet that bank robber wishes he had your mask from the PRC when he was doing his heist.
Yeah, he wouldn't have been said to have a zombie look.
Exactly.
Right.
And also, I've started having dreams where in my dreams people are either wearing masks, or last night I actually dreamt, why aren't people wearing masks?
Yeah. Aren't those weird, these dreams that are so infused with our, current anxieties? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then also, I really wanted to call you Monday just with the senseless shooting that took place in Atlanta.
Okay.
And as someone who has kind of lived there off and on for 3 years, I've never seen I've never dealt with a more corrupt police department than that in the city of Atlanta. And let me just say that my wife and I were at this one it was a brewery birthday party, and we were in a VIP area. I went to go, band was starting, we wanted to hear, I go get us some drinks. As I'm coming back, I hear my wife say to this guy who was probably middle-aged, she just said, my wife was standing there. Next thing he goes, get the fuck away from me. And he pushed her so hard that her head kind of bounced off the concrete. And
what?
Of course,
the concrete floor or wall? Floor?
The concrete floor.
She went down.
Oh, she went down. He pushed her a good 15 feet. So, your first reaction is, I want to go get this guy. But I just started shouting, assault, assault. And one of Atlanta's police officers came over. I'm attending to her. And then next thing you know, she's like, he's getting away. He's going on the other side of the fence. The officer then says, thinking, oh, well, you've had too much to drink, that he goes, well, you said you didn't want to press charges. And I then said, you never asked that question. And, of course, we would have pressed charges. And she had a mild concussion. He just didn't want to write it up for the evening. And then another situation.
And they never went after the guy.
No,
Why did he push?
anything.
What happened? Why did he push her?
Nothing. Not just because I think it was a kind of homophobic. My wife was standing here, and he.
She said my wife was standing, and that did it.
Because I was coming back, and I heard
she had a wife.
I heard the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it was homophobic.
And so that was interaction number one. Interaction number two was a member of our crew. We were shooting late one night.
We must say that you work in the film industry.
Yeah.
You work in the film industry. Okay.
And one of our crew guys who worked in special effects, and I mean, this special effects guys are a different breed, let me just say.
I'm sure.
And this guy was built like a brick shit house. So nicest guy, stops, gets gas. Two young kids pulled a gun on him and had it up to his head. And he said he had that moment of, what are you going to do? Are you going to fight or are you going to flight? And he fought. And he got the kid down, and the gun went off, and he got shot in the leg. Kids take off.
Who got shot? Your friend?
Our special effects. Yeah, our special effects.
Was shot in the leg. Okay.
Yeah, he got shot in the leg.
Okay.
And so anyway, the police come, and they, he was bleeding, and they had paramedics, and they're like, well, if we take you to the hospital, if the ambulance takes you to the hospital, your car is going to be impounded. He's like, why is my car being impounded? And the other thing they told him, too, is, you know what, good luck. We'll never find those guys. We'll never find those kids. Even though they had video, they had everything. That was his first. And he said, I've never thought that would happen, that the first reaction was I was just held up and shot. And
his car was going to be impounded, and they're telling him they're not even going to try to find the guys who had the gun to his head.
Exactly. So he drove himself to the hospital with a leg wound. I mean, because when you're working on a film crew, too, and it doesn't matter what city, you normally have police on payroll, or you're paying municipal police
for security
lockdowns and service.
Yeah.
Yes, I've worked in a lot of cities where you hear, this city really has corrupt police. This city really has corrupt police. Atlanta, they really have corrupt police.
It sounds like they don't like to work. It sounds like they don't like to work.
Lynn, they would put in time cards and stuff, and I said, how does this guy work? When does he get to work as a cop? Because our one show paid him for 64 straight hours. How is that possible? But, of course, you can't question it. So when I heard the reaction from the police that we're overworked and everything, bullshit was my reaction.
Okay.
And I just hope whatever changes that are coming there. And the sad part is there are a couple officers and that I got to deal with that some of them I even still stay in touch with. They're good people. But you have other interactions with other ones. And I've had other ones with police in that department, too, that it didn't surprise me what happened, especially when I saw, majority of that force is African American. When I saw it was two white officers in that tape, I thought, oh, geez. And when you look at that tape, and, the guy's as calm can be. Yeah. When they go to cuff him, I swear to God that one cop whispered something under his breath to him to cause that reaction. It was that same, am I going to fight? Is it fight or fright?
And he ran.
Yeah. So those are just some of the things I just wanted to call and just say to you, and just like I said, with some experiences with that particular force, and
well, thank you.
And not understanding, why this happened, especially in a city where if and we've said this so many times, if we were African American, if we were gay and African American, here, Mike in D.C., gay or lesbian, I just said gay. You are that's one of the cities I would want to live, because you have such a strong community there.
Right.
You don't feel, it's not, I hate to say it, it's not like Pittsburgh. You actually have an African upper class, middle class.
Right.
You don't have those societal pressures that you have, like up here. You don't have those in Atlanta. And the sad part is that this in that way did spread to that city.
Yeah.
So.
God.
Yeah. And as far as the corporations, I'm not surprised, Lynn, because when you think their whole thing is it risk? What's going to be more? If we take the risk, don't take. What's our risk reward?
Yeah,
and that's why actuaries now are the hottest. They've been the hottest thing with corporations now for how many years? Because they now know
they can be better. They can be better gamblers with our lives.
Yes, the penalties we have to pay are nothing if they had to actually replace those transmission lines.
That's right.
That cost to our shareholders would have been more. Now, hey, we've now just done a whole new thing. So it's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. And if corporations are people, instead of them being allowed to file bankruptcy, I want a death certificate. They can no longer be that company. And whatever assets they have, they should be seized, just like someone's death.
Yeah, and
an
too bad shareholders.
An executor over it.
Yeah. Oh, God. Hey, thanks for a call. Thanks for your great call. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lynn. Have a good
Hang in there. Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Oh, man. Okay. I want to, there's so many things to share. Quickly, just in case you didn't see this, yesterday, I believe, was the second anniversary of the death, is that true, of Antoine Rose? An unarmed black boy at the hands of a white East Pittsburgh cop. And I want to say that his mother, Michelle Kenny, was in Washington, D.C. Yesterday. And her son, Antoine, his name came out of the foul mouth of the President of the United States, who at one point before he did this photo op with some very hand-picked police representatives, signed this crapola, order on policing. And at one point, Trump said, I have just concluded a meeting with incredible families, just incredible families that have been through so much. The families of Ahmaud Arbery, Botham Jean, Antoine Rose, Jamel Robertson, and on and on. He went on and on. These are incredible people. Incredible, that seemed to be the word of the day. And it's so sad. Well, Antoine Rose's mother is enraged. She is quoted on CNBC as saying, I can't stand the lies. And the lies were that Trump had met with her. She hadn't gone to the White House to meet him. She put on Facebook, I am not in the White House. I chose not to meet their president. I came to Washington to meet and speak with senators that could have an impact on this movement. I will not have a conversation with anyone who disrespects us. I will not have a conversation with someone that clearly will not have any empathy. I just wanted to say that he can't even do a thing like that. Meeting with family members without still lying. And why any of these families, she made the right choice, why any of these families would go is beyond me. So, just wanted to add that local touch. Also, interesting piece in the New York Times today, headlined "Why Protest Movements Are Civil Only in Retrospect," and it's a very, a very good piece because it tells us that even though there's a federal holiday now, of course, January 20th, honoring the life and work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As this piece says, in his life, he was spied on and blackmailed by the U.S. government. He was arrested roughly 30 times. He was beaten, he was stalked, and he was assassinated. And when he died, he was one of the most disliked people in America. So, talking to a number of historians, this piece shows how in the moment these social movements, as they unfold, they are portrayed often, the parts of them that are the most disruptive, looters, that are the most perhaps violent, the verbiage that is most terrifying to a white ear. As the movement is happening, the media portrays these movements in one way, and that's a scary way. What Dylan was saying. And then, give it a decade or two, when we retell the story of the movement, when it's behind us, it's the least confrontational parts of the movement that get pushed to the fore. The movement gets sanitized for public consumption. The Reverend King sanitized for public consumption. This is how our history gets so warped. We forget about the opposition. We forget that Dr. King was hated, spied on, beaten, blackmailed. And we create a mythology. That we can live with. So when we think of Rosa Parks, what do you think? Hard-working woman, finally, after a hard day at work. She was tired. She just wanted to sit down. That's the whitewashed version. The reality was Rosa Parks was very much a long-time activist, and her sitting on that bus was a calculated political act. But that's not the story that most Americans have been taught. So what ends up happening is an antiseptic image of these, at the time, feared and loathed activists. Also an oversimplified story of right and wrong ways to get change. And so any hope of learning, actually, from how a movement did push things, bend that arc of the moral universe a little toward justice, gets messed with in the retelling. It somehow then becomes, well, of course. What wonderful people. That's not what they were getting at the time. And what we think of now is not the reality. Here's one professor who says, the whole purpose of protest, and someone said this, I think Susan, my sister, said it the other day. The whole purpose of protest is to interrupt your daily life, is to interrupt the previous scheduled programming, is to make you uncomfortable, is to make you pay attention. The lesson is not that plain civility is something that would ever force change. Ask nicely. Say please. Like George Floyd said how many times as the life was being squeezed out of him. Say pretty please. And here's the reality. When Dr. King was assassinated and the rioting broke out, communities were set on fire. What happened? White people got scared. And they voted for Richard Nixon because he was promising them law and order. In 92, the Los Angeles riots. What happened in the wake of that? The city of Los Angeles voters elected their first Republican mayor in decades. So what happened when we had a black president? Yeah, the white people freak out. And give us Donald Trump and his neo-fascist, racist nationalists. The reality of the story, the real history, is rarely taken in. And remember that. You think you know about Dr. King? You think you know about all of these historical figures, black, white, and other? We don't. When those brave young people sat down trying to integrate those lunch counters in the early 60s, Gallup pollsters weren't far behind, and they found that 57% of Americans thought those sit-ins and those freedom riders were hurting chances of integration. After the March on Washington, Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, that was 1963. After the March on Washington, the Gallup pollsters were right there. And you know what they found? Directly after Dr. King did his I Have a Dream speech, 74%, 3/4 of Americans found and believed that mass demonstrations like that harmed their cause. And remember, Dr. King at that time was looked on with fear and loathing. Well, let's do some more history. You saw that Aunt Jemima has been retired. Yeah, Aunt Jemima's bit the dust, along with Confederate statues, even though she got a remake. Remember when Aunt Jemima used to, look like an old mammy out of Gone with the Wind, and then they thought, that's a little, and they gave her a do-over, so she looked sort of modern, didn't have that... Yeah, so she's Quaker Oats, which owns the brand, is saying that she came from a racial stereotype, and she got to go. She's based off an old minstrel song, reportedly sung by the slaves, called "Old Aunt Jemima." Yeah, okay. Well, Aunt Jemima is very much the whole thing linked to, of course, Southern slavery, racism, the whole bit. But also want to clue you into another purveyor of a food staple, and that would be Uncle Ben. I mean, I don't know what's in your cupboard. You might have Aunt Jemima there right alongside Uncle Ben. And Uncle Ben, this is an interesting story, and I want to thank, Father Joseph for sending it to me. The truth about, the truth. Here again, God, we've got so much to learn. So much to learn. Uncle Ben, oh, come on. Why won't it let me have the page? Uncle Ben was a way for a very, for a rich white company to, to sell. It was originally called Uncle Ben's Plantation Rice. And understand that, and I can't find the article, I can't believe this. Understand that the Uncle Ben, Aunt Jemima, how come all these black, logos are aunts and uncles? Well, I'll tell you why. Because white folks, well, they were uncomfortable allowing a black man to be called Mr. For that matter, I guess even acknowledging he has a last name. And the same for black women. So they don't get to be a Mr. or a Mrs. They're called aunt and uncle, which is what you did to slaves. Aunt or uncle, first name, no last name, no standing. And it is very common in our history to use black faces to promote products to white audiences. There was no Uncle Ben. There was I guess there was a maitre d' at some hotel that was used to model his face. He got a few bucks for it, but his name, his story, was used to sell rice for over 80 years, but he didn't make any money from it. And I guess Uncle Ben's still out there, isn't he? They haven't pulled that. Yes, he was given $50. Wow. For the exclusive rights to his image. The people who gave him the $50 obviously profited by the hundreds of millions. Uncle Ben's plantation rice. This stuff is so suffused in our history that we can all spend the rest of our lives unlearning what we've been taught and learning what we need to know. Closer to home, to our local newspaper. I do want to say the City Paper's new issue came out today, and its cover is the why am I blanking on his name? Santiago, the photojournalist who was also pulled from coverage because he retweeted Alexis Johnson's very funny Kenny Chesney tweet. He is on the cover, and he has left the Post-Gazette. Ryan Dito, who wrote the story, says that he probably will be leaving Pittsburgh too. And Ryan says, this is what Pittsburgh keeps doing. We don't have a lot of young black professionals. And on top of it, Santiago was an immigrant from the Dominican Republic. And we don't have a lot of immigrants. Young, black, immigrant, professional, and he's gone. Gonna be gone. Block and Burris are destroying this 126-year-old newspaper. It's something. And we've talked about how it's become a national story. And the Washington Post, which has already published articles about it, today published a huge piece about it. It's very large. I don't know what it looks like in a print edition, but if you're looking at it on your computer, it goes on and on and on and on. Here's some. Reporters say stories have disappeared from the Post-Gazette's website, and it's unclear who is writing the paper's skimpy, unbylined articles about the protests in Pittsburgh. They talk, if you're not getting information about what's going on here with Black Lives Matter protests, you're not getting it from the Post-Gazette. Actually, Ryan Dito is talked to and quoted in the Washington Post article today about the fact that by default, this struggling alternative weekly, Pittsburgh City paper, has had to desperately try to cover what normally would be covered by our daily newspaper. And you heard Ryan talk about that last week and saying there's no way he can. We got a staff of like 3 or 4 who are actually out there doing it, and you can't do it. But if you want to see the from A to Z how this story plays out on a national stage, wow. And Burris, the editor, is left to what? Appear on Laura Ingraham on Fox News, trying to spread his lies about what is happening there. Michael Santiago, I'm sorry, I forgot his first name. Here again, the Washington Post. Coverage of the protests since these people have been removed, these reporters have been removed, coverage of the protests has been noticeably muted in the pages of the Post-Gazette. The day that Santiago had been scheduled to photograph protests, the paper instead ran a wire photo of the demonstrations, along with a short story with no interviews. The next day, a larger story appeared. It was written by the paper's classical music critic. They are not allowing their news reporters to cover the biggest news story in a lifetime, and the classical music critic is now covering the protests? The Washington Post reports more recent stories about local protests now appear as short write-ups composed mostly of photos and descriptions based on Facebook posts, and they carry no bylines. That's your Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. It ends with Michael Santiago. After his assignment was canceled, Santiago looked through a collection of Black Lives Matter protest photos taken by photojournalist friends around the country that weekend. He was devastated that he couldn't document what he called one of the most important civil rights moments of his lifetime. To have that taken away from me, he said, I have no words for it. On Monday, he announced he would take a buyout and leave the Post-Gazette. What a shame. Doug says, little known fact, you can use Uncle Ben's pre-made rice to grow psychedelic mushrooms. All righty. Well, geez, thanks. Never know. Okay, and here, I'm going to let you go. I just got the Allegheny County Health Department report. Let's see. Today's report reflects no increase in cases. And an increase, though, of 3 deaths. Wow. Okay, I think that did it for me. Hope you have a good day. Be careful out there. And talk to you tomorrow. Bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.